Hey, it's good to be here. I also taught here at the university for 7 years, and I would say 75% of the classes I taught were right in this building, the Uvar Hazy building. I taught communications because that's what I did my undergraduate and my graduate work in communications. So, for example, I taught public speaking. So I better be good, because if I'm not good, but remember the old adage, right? Those who can't do? Yeah. So don't say that to my wife, though. She just retired as a teacher for 32 years. And so I taught here, and I had a great experience. And they contacted me, the board. We're a nonprofit 501c3, for those of you who know what that means, the theater. And so I'm governed by a board of directors, and they're all pillars of the community. We have the former CEO of Nationwide Insurance. We have 2 city council people, a former mayor, our current mayor was on our board, and now she's a mayor, county commissioner, and just a lot of pillars of our community. And they came to me in 2020 and said, we'd like you to become our full-time president and CEO. And I said, okay, all right. And they said, but you have to give up teaching, because we want you to go full time. And I said, well, that's going to cost me money. So I have a number in my head. And the board chairman said, well, this is what we were thinking about paying you. And the number was higher than I had in my head. So I'm not good in math, but I know to immediately make the right decision. The other thing that's great is, isn't timing in life like so key? You know, when bad fortune happens, you hope that it's in the best timing possible. I blew a tire about 2 years ago. That's the bad news. I was on my way to a really important appointment, and I blew a tire, but it was literally on I-15 a mile from my house, right? Not out by Baker at 109 degrees in the summer, right? So good timing. I actually told the person who I had made the appointment with I'd be there in an hour and 15 minutes. And he said, okay. So I got there a little bit late. So the reason the timing was good on me becoming the full-time president of St. George's Musical Theater and leaving the college was because, does anybody remember what was happening like in the early part of 2020? Does anybody remember? Yeah, so the college completely shut down and decided to go all online. And I could tell you that the overwhelming amount of students did not want to do online instruction. Interesting, I thought, that most of the students who attend, at least here, I can't speak for all other universities, did not want to do online, which is counterintuitive, right? For our younger generation, you think all of them would love to do all their classes remote. No, most students, at least here on this campus, liked coming to class, liked face-to-face instruction, and liked interacting with other fellow students in class. I thought that was kind of cool, right? And since I also taught a film class, online instruction was not conducive to teaching communication or film. So it's like, okay, well, I'm not really digging what's happening right now. And back in those days, even though they said there was a curve, remember? Wasn't it like a 2-week, what was it, or 6-week? Yeah, right? There was like a short period. Everybody thought, yeah, this is all going to go away by May. Not so fast. In fact, I remember that my wife and I, she retired, and we were going to go on a cruise to Italy. If you want to plan the worst possible thing to do before a pandemic, it's plan a cruise to Italy. Do you remember Italy was like the first place it hit, and that whole country shut down. So the cruise line, because everybody in the cruise business panicked, right? They said, if you will immediately rebook your cruise, it's canceled now, but if you will immediately rebook, we're going to give you 18 months to do the cruise, and we're going to give you a huge discount. So we'll give you your money back, and we'll give you a 25% discount. So you get basically 25%, but you had to commit right then. And we said, okay, we'll go exactly a year. A year? Flash forward to March of 2021. Still, no. Cruise lines, no, still. So anyway. So I'm glad to be back here on campus, and more. Hawaii's really expensive, and it kind of makes sense too, because it's interesting how different countries have handled the pandemic. So as you may be aware, even though Hawaii was by far the safest state in the United States, they did a complete lockdown. Understandable, because they got travelers from all over the world there, especially Asia, right? So they wanted to shut down, and up to 40% of all local businesses went out of business during the pandemic. So guess what happens? So when you have fewer businesses, right, fewer suppliers, everybody raises their price, especially coming out of the pandemic, because they had a lot of loss. There's some businesses that were shut down completely for 2 years. So a lot of the restaurants, hotels, they had to make up for that lost income, and so they raised their prices. I am not kidding. We had virgin pina coladas at the beach, and they were $17. And we remember going there many years ago when we used to say, can you believe this drink is $6? I'll have another. It's just so delicious when you're there. It's kind of like eating a Mickey Mouse bar at Disneyland. Yes, it's expensive, but it's the most delicious ice cream because you're eating it at Disneyland. But $17, and it's only $2 more if you put alcohol in it. This practically is forcing you to become an alcoholic. I mean, come on. So anyway, it was fun. We had a great time. So that's my wife and I. We're cruising on a catamaran on the Nepali coast of Kauai. That's where we were. Great place. And so we're rested and relaxed. So we're going to come tonight and we're going to talk to you a little bit about the theater. And I thought what I would do is just give you a little background on the history of our area. A little bit on that history. So you know some of the basics, right? That most of the pioneers settled here in 1861. They were told by Brigham Young to come down here, settle this godforsaken land. They didn't know what they could grow. Can you imagine living here before air conditioning? I can barely live here during the summer with air conditioning everywhere I go, right? And so that big group of early settlers came here. And you may not be aware that one of the first buildings they built was a social hall, so they could have dramas and different plays. And I'm going to read you right from the history of it, because I'm not a historian, and there's been several historians who have written about it. And I'm going to read you, including Lyman Hafen, who is kind of like the local historian. The first public building in St. George was neither church nor school, but the St. George Hall, a place where residents could gather for amusements and culture. Completed just 2 years after the first settlers rolled their wagons to a halt, the hall served for many years until a slightly larger social hall was built. Then in 1875, the Opera House. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Opera House. Then the Tabernacle, then the upper story performance hall in the original Dixie College building on Main and 100 South. Then the original Fine Arts Center on the new Dixie College campus. And according to Andrew Carl Larson in his book, I Was Called to Dixie, it all began when Erastus Snow encouraged St. George founders to construct a building for education and social purposes. St. George Hall, as it was called, was up and running by 1862. It was completed. Until it was completed, dramas were performed in an outdoor Bowery near where St. George Tabernacle was eventually built. So if you just go to the Tabernacle and just go up the street just a little bit, that's where the Bowery was. According to Larson, the first play performed in St. George was The Eaton Boy with Caddy Ivins in the leading role and many locals, including Orson Pratt Jr., in supporting roles. With Snow's support, local artists formed St. George Lyceum and Dramatic Association in 1864. There was great interest in the venture and good talent to draw from. Actors were fined 50 cents if they were late for rehearsal and were at risk of expulsion if they strayed from the script. I wish I could charge our actors 50 cents today. And here you see a picture of what the St. George Opera House first looked like. So they moved from that St. George Hall. They constructed in 1873 and was finally finished in 1875. What we now know as the St. George. They still call it the Social Hall, and it took on a lot of functions over the years, but eventually they called it the St. George Opera House. And if you look, and if you've been at the St. George Opera House, where we perform to this day, you'll notice a lot of similarities to that. And this is a photo from that time period a little bit later of a bunch of local actors. Thought those were cool pictures. I thought this was really funny. Marketing has changed a lot in those days. And I love this advertisement of one particular play from the 1870s. Notice at the very top, every mother, wife, husband, daughter, and son should see it. Then 10 nights in a bar room. presents more different features and characters than any other play of its kind. It has reformed many a drunkard. So, in all advertising, you should have, a cause and an action, change. You have to motivate people. It teaches a great life lesson. Presented by a carefully selected company of ladies and gentlemen whose hearts are in the work. An entertainment for everybody, a beneficial to all. Remember, this company is a guaranteed attraction. We pledge you a first-class performance of the popular drama. It's fun. And then this is Zadie Walker-Miles, an accomplished poet and actor in St. George. So women of those days, even though they had a very difficult life, there was plenty of very talented women, as you might expect, that formed the foundation of the artists in their day. Love that story. These are some pictures of the Opera House prior to its renovation in 1995. And I show these because you can really see how it still maintained a lot of the old architecture from the 1870s. This was a little addition that they put on, and this is where they stored costumes and also had dressing rooms over in that little thing. That was torn down during the renovation. But basically, you're entering here from the west side. This is Main Street here. The roundabout is here. The post office is over here. So you can kind of still see. And then when they did the renovation in 1995, they also added the social hall right across the way. And the two buildings sit side by side, and then the Arts Museum was also completed at that time, calling it the Pioneer Center for the Arts. So that kind of gives you a little history. Can I tell you one hilarious story about that time? I love this story. And if you go on a tour of the Opera House, they tell you this story. And it's true. When opening night finally came, this was when the Opera House was brand new in 1875, 1876. Affectionately known as the Opera House, was brightly lit with candles and a few precious coal oil lamps. Soon the hall was crowded with an awestruck audience. In addition to the main seating, on each side of the stage was a raised gallery with 40 chairs. All the prosperous families in town were there too. So too were nearly everyone else who could squeeze their way in. There was a makeshift orchestra pit in front of the stage where the musicians sought to keep the audience entertained until the production began. And I'm going to show you a picture that they had the first raked stage mechanism that was built in the United States. And they did that, depending on the historian you ask, either to lower the east end of the stage or raise the west end of the of the main floor. So it was the first stadium seating ever created. That way the people in the back row had a better view. So instead of building risers, they just tipped the stage. And if you go now to the Opera House and go downstairs, go on one of the tours, or if I happen to be there, come track me down, I'll take you downstairs. And you can see that when they did the restoration in 1995, they put back that entire rake mechanism, complete with how it would have looked back and then with a stone and wood mechanism. It's really, really cool. Play scripts were hard to come by in those days, especially in a place as remote as St. George. So again, the thespians of southern Utah made do with what they had. They had collected parts of plays from every available source and strung them together as best they could. The first play presented was Jenny Brown at the Relief of the Lucknow. But from the reports of those in attendance on that historic night, it would have seemed to be an ill-conceived version of Easy Lynn and the Lady of Lions. So maybe there's a little plagiarism going on back then, sort of southern Utah. The audience was properly impressed by the scenery and completely swept away into the drama of the story as it unfolded. It was a tale of a cold husband and a wife seduced by a scoundrel and then abandoned. In the last act, the wife, suffering from some loathsome disease, crawled through a snowstorm toward her husband's doorstep. Every child in St. George had been saving precious scraps of paper for weeks to pay their tickets. The papers were torn into bits and thrown about the suffering Lady Isabel to give the proper effect. Now, on the doorstep, she pled to her husband, "Just let me see my children just once ere I die." While the entire audience wept with her, the husband stamped his foot and proclaimed, "No, no, 1,000 times no," and slammed the door, leaving her to die in the snow on his doorstep. The sobs of the women in the audience were audible, but it was a miner from Silver Reef who decided to take matters into his own hands. Those miners, they were a rough bunch. The miners were part of the privileged few who actually had cash to pay for their tickets. And they were there in force in the front seats. It was evident they had stopped in Leeds to purchase sacramental wine and use it freely for non-sacramental purposes on their way to the play that night. The miner rose to his feet, aimed his six-shooter at the stage and shouted, "You let her see them kids or I'll blow your brains out, you blankety blank blank." His mates dived for his arm, but they were too late to stop the shot. They had to divert his aim and the bullet hit the ceiling. This had to be the most exciting event to occur in the Opera House, but there were many more pleasurable and cultural experiences there over the next 50 years. And if you go in that building on a tour, and they conduct tours called St. George Live all the time, they will show you, the person playing Orson Pratt giving you a tour will show you where that bullet hole is still in the ceiling of the Opera House. They weren't going to cover that bullet hole. That's the best theater story. Well, aside from Lincoln's Theater, okay? Right? Ford's Theater, inside of that was pretty exciting too. This is what the renovation looks like now, basically, right? And that's the west side. And you can see they put a sign up there, Opera House 1875. And then this is a picture of the mechanism below, complete with the stonework and woodwork. And if you go in there now, you'll see a bunch of costume racks where we have costumes in that little cubby. So with that background, I mean, I could spend a lot of time on the history of the performing arts in this town. But I think what I do, and by the way, at the end of tonight's presentation, I'll answer any questions that you may have about theater, about who's going to win the election, about sports, about cars, and about rock and roll. Any question in those I'm pretty good at, all right? Obviously, the election, we're not going to talk about that because we want this to be a happy presentation. St. George Musical Theater has been in operation for over 25 years. How did I get involved? Well, I was not a theater person. In fact, as my wife would tell you, that when we met when I was 19, 20 years old, if you would have told her back then that 40 years later that I'd be the president of a theater organization, she would have really laughed hard. She would have said, Bruce is not an artistic guy. He loves sports, he loves music, but there's not really an artistic bone in his body. And am I wrong? She loved theater. She was telling me about theater. But that's how life is sometimes, right? So I thought I'd share a little bit of the circuitous route that took me to theater. So we were living in Bakersfield. I know, somebody had to. We grew up in Southern California, but we decided to move to Fresno right after we got married. You know where Fresno is? From Fresno grapes, right? Central California. And I went to school there. I graduated from Fresno State. And right after I graduated from Fresno State, I went to work for Xerox Corporation. And I really liked their organization. I interviewed with IBM too, because IBM was really big back in those days. And I had a test and an interview in Los Angeles in IBM headquarters. And when I walked into the interview, I'll never forget, every person, every male working there, and there wasn't a lot of females. First sign of a problem, not enough females. When I walked in, all the men had blue pinstripe suits on. Because can you picture that in your mind with IBM? But you know, for years they were known as the pinstripe blue, and I walked around and I go, oh, these aren't my people. I don't need to wear a pinstripe suit every day. I would, on certain occasions, they'd be great. Anyway, they didn't really want me, which is good. So I started with Xerox, and I was promoted to work in the Xerox Engineering division down in Bakersfield, California, because we had a lot of customers in the oil industry. And I also worked with the Department of Defense, Vandenberg Air Force Base over on the coast of California, Edwards Air Force Base, where they land all the space shuttles, and they used to build the B-29. And so anyway, those were all of our big, so the upside was it was a great promotion. I could make a lot more money. The downside is we had to live in Bakersfield. But there were some lessons there. We learned to love. I don't know where you all have lived, but can't you learn to love to live anywhere if you really try a little bit? Because people are great everywhere. So one day we were living in Bakersfield, and I was reading the newspaper. Anybody remember the newspaper? Okay, because when I tell this story, if it's a college group, Professor Bennett, what's a newspaper? Okay, well, It's a big piece of paper. Oh, my great-great-grandpa used to wear. Anyway, and it had an advertisement in there, and it said, casting now for a show called Big River. I didn't know any theater, literally. Maybe, if they had said casting now for Sound of Music, I would have said, okay, I know what Sound of Music is. But the reason it caught my eye is because it said, the new musical about the life of Huckleberry Finn. So that got my attention because that was my favorite book when I was growing up, with music by Roger Miller. And my dad raised me on Roger Miller. Some of you don't remember him maybe. King of the Road, right? A lot of great novelty songs, right? And so I went home with my wife and I said, look, they're casting for Big River. And it's a story of Huckleberry Finn with music by Roger Miller. I should go do this. And my wife threw the newspaper and said, Bruce, it's funny. And I said, no, why wouldn't I? What's the downside? I'm 27 years old. I've never set foot on stage. And she said, sure, go try. Go try. What will you do? I go, I don't know. I'll listen to the music on cassette. How many of you remember cassettes? And I'll see if I can come up with a song. Well, I walked into the audition, and you just have to picture me with more hair, thinner, and at 27. They didn't really care if I could sing or dance. I looked good. So I walked in there. I was pretty nervous. I sang a song, and they all sat up right away because, you know, I've been in now how many auditions? Probably 100 auditions. When you see a fresh face, you always sit up. Because if you've seen people, even if they're good, you kind of seen the same people all the time sometimes. So I knew that when they sat up, they go, oh, this is somebody new. Somebody new. All right, who is this guy? So they said, well, what do you want to do in the show? And I said, I don't even know what roles are. I'm probably a little too old for Huckleberry Finn. And I said, but I'll paddle a raft if that's what you need me to do. Just tell me what you need me to do. So they did it, and they cast me in two big roles. Attorney, Counselor Robinson, and then Uncle Silas, which is Huck's uncle. I didn't know that they were big roles. They had a lot of lines in it. I was terrible. I was terrible. The director, after a couple of weeks of rehearsal, called me one day and said, Bruce, I'd like you to come to my house and we're going to run through your lines. Do a little bit of character studying. I said, okay, great. That's great. So I go to his house on a Saturday afternoon. He's a college professor, many years in theater. And we start working, and it's really only like 2 pages of lines, maybe. One for one character, 1.5 pages for one character. But they're pretty important plot points in story, right? I'm not kidding. I was probably there for 4 hours. He was so patient with me. Okay, now try it like this. Now, have you ever been in this situation? I want you to bring that kind of attitude and this kind of anger and this kind of this and stand up straight and all these. He was giving me all these tips. And I walked out and I said, man, this guy is cool. He would spend this much time with an actor to get it right. And then I found out there was nobody else going to his library on a Saturday afternoon. It was me, because I was so terrible. And I tell people that story because in community theater, of all places, it's a great place to start. We had a woman come into our theater 3 years ago. Jody is her name. And she said, I can't sing, I can't dance. I just retired as a travel planner. And I don't know anything about theater, but I saw your show. Can't remember what show it was, maybe My Fair Lady. She goes, I love what you guys do. If you can find room for me on stage. She's probably 60 years old. And we said, yes, we can. We cast her in South Pacific, and she was a radio officer. We got her a great World War II outfit, uniform. She was fantastic. She'd been in another show and another show. We hired her as a stage manager because she's, you can imagine, a travel planner. She's really OCD. You don't want to live with a person like that, but you love hiring people like that. She's been fantastic. So one of my messages is today about the value of community theater, that unlike any other stage, we really have a complete open door policy. I'm disappointed that we aren't getting more people of a certain age to audition. Every single show has a person over 55, just about. Got a grandfather type of role, or a mother that takes care of the house, or a grandma or something. And you would think with our population of 1/3 the population is over 55, we'd get lots of people of a certain age. We don't. And I'm convinced it's because people think they're not needed. And that is so not true. We have seen people reborn in their 60s and 70s by opportunities we've given them. 3 of my directors are over 70. I love older directors. They show up on time. They can be tough on actors and demand discipline, but still seem very caring and kind. They listen to me when I give them advice. I mean, they have to turn up their hearing aids, but they listen to me. They're wonderful people. And as I've gotten older, I've been more aware of an ageism out there, right? Where we take these people in their 50s and their 60s and we say, you should be retired and you should go watch sunsets in Hawaii for the rest of your life. So another message for me today is, don't give up on your life. There's plenty of opportunity out there, right? There may be obstacles, but there are opportunities. We would love to see anybody of a certain age. Every show has somebody like that. And they're great on stage because guess what? Guess who our patrons are, right? Of a certain age. They love to see their peers out on stage, aren't you? Aren't you kind of proud when you see somebody out there? That's Fred! I thought he was on hospice and there he is singing! So this is a little history of St. George Musical Theater. One of these historians told me, Lyman Hafen told me, that when we build a new theater on Main Street, and I'll show you some pictures in a second, it'll be the first brand new community-centered performing arts venue in St. George since the Opera House was built in 1875. I feel like we're doing something historic. I feel like the pioneers would be proud of what we're doing in that Opera House. I feel their spirit. We do check all the weapons at the door. We try to not let anybody who's had a little bit too much non-sacramental wine in, but I still feel their pioneer spirit, and I'm so grateful for what we've been able to do in the Opera House. All right, we've probably had 450,000 patrons over the past 10 years. I don't know if you know our history, but we were performing in a variety of venues. The Opera House, Dixie State allowed us to perform here. We kind of were without a home for a while. We renovated an old gymnasium, the Woodward Gymnasium. It was an old 60-year-old gymnasium downtown, and that was torn down in 2008 to make way for the town square. So we were literally without a home. So we went dark for almost 6 years. We forged a new agreement with then Mayor Dan MacArthur and Gary Esplin, the city manager, and we were really fortunate because John Pike had just gotten elected mayor, and he is a huge arts guy. He was very, very supportive. So they asked us if we would go back into Opera House where we had performed many years before. And that's what started our comeback in 2014. And since that time, we've performed 65 shows in that 10-year period. These are our board members. This is a little bit of that history. That's our first in the round show performed in the Opera House in 1998. There's a guy right there. That's me with a fake mustache. That's Sound of Music. This is a cool picture. 2 of the young girls in that show have made careers out of Broadway. So Delaney Westfall, she's the daughter of Judge Mike Westfall. You may have heard of him. He's Cedar City based now. He's a court judge. Wonderful family, Karen, his wife. Delaney is probably 32 now, and she is in Sweeney Todd, big hit on Broadway, and she's been in a lot of shows. We went back in New York and saw her at Kinky Boots. Wonderful talent. So I only show that picture just to say, not even a lot of the kids that are doing theater are going to go on the way to Broadway, but we have had a great success with a lot of our kids coming up through St. George Musical Theater, community theater, going on to big things. Now that was the Woodward building that got torn down, and then we were at Dixie State. So this kind of gives you a little history of our venue. And we've done, since 2014, we call it our comeback year, 65 shows now. This is 5 shows late, and we've only done 2 shows. We've only repeated 2 shows in that entire period of time. So we are busy, and this is why my hair was full 10 years ago, and it's thinning now. We have significantly outgrown the Opera House, which is limited to 125 seats. We regularly sell out performances. They have maintained a 96% capacity for our shows. Other than the Opera House, which has limitation on capacity, stage, and technical abilities, there is no built for purpose community theater space in St. George. A large space with modern facilities would enable us to help triple the capacity, increase the number of performances, and greatly enhance the live performing arts available to a fast-growing community. And this was our arts proposal to the city, the county, and the state to construct a new 375 to 400 seat in the round theater with a modern stage and facilities, thus maintaining the intimate 360-degree experience. If you haven't seen our shows, you know that our stage looks like this, and there is seating in completely around. So even though the stage is rectangle, all the seating is in the round. And we love that. If it's one thing our patrons tell us all the time, we like that immersive, intimate space. That type, it's interesting because that type of presentation is both catching on and dwindling at the same time. It's catching on where in some areas there's a lot of competition for theater, like in New York, New Jersey, in that area, because people want to do something that's interesting and different, and it costs a lot less money to put on a small, intimate performance, right? But it's hard to make money because you don't have as many seats. So this is why theater, which is going great guns in Utah, right? Theaters, when they build new theaters, they always build much, much bigger theaters. So there's a little tiny theater in Orem. It's about 250 seats. It's an old building. It's about a 50-year-old building, and they're building a new building. And their building is going to be, the project's going to be about $53 million, and they're building two theaters, one that's 770 seats and a black box of 200 seats. So they are quadrupling their capacity. And you get it, right? Because it's financial. If you're going to have people donate money and you're going to look for grants, they're going to say, here's the financial justification. We're going from X amount of seats, and we're going to have 4 times as many. So we're going up by 2.5 times, but we're still only going to have 375 to 400 seats. We're bound and determined to keep it very immersive and very intimate. And we think that brings people to the theater. We're not trying to compete with Tuacahn. They do what they do, and what they do is amazing. But we want to keep it intimate. We think you could have seen My Fair Lady and Sound of Music many times in other theaters, but when you see it in a small, intimate space, it changes the experience for the audience. We're going to, then a little bonus project that we're excited about, and we'll talk to you more about. We're going to renovate and repurpose the old Cinema 6 movie theater into the Performing Arts Campus, which will feature alternative performance spaces, rehearsal rooms, dance studios, and allow for increased community involvement, including youth and education programs. How many of you know where the old Cinema 6 movie theater is? It used to be the discount theater. It went under right at the beginning of 2020. And so I was able to convince the board, hey, it's right across the street from where we're building the new building. That's not coincidence. Right? So it took me a few months, but they said, yeah, let's look at that. So we're renovating that rather than tearing it down. And it's going to be a completely different alternative experience. So we're building a performance stage, a standard concert stage in there. We're going to do tribute concerts. So we're going to do like a tribute concert to Linda Ronstadt. They're going to do a Neil Diamond, Barbra Streisand tribute, then a Beatles tribute. We're going to do a Christmas show in there. We'll have stand-up comedy night. So very busy little center, very different than the big theater across the way where we're going to do our typical core business model, which is musicals, right? We're going to have rehearsal spaces in there and 2 dance studios. There's a lot of dance organizations that don't have enough room in this town. And then we're hoping to build in one of the auditoriums a recording studio where musicians can come in and record. There is not a community accessible recording studio in this town. That was shocked anybody who travels from any other town. So we're going to make that available to anybody, classical musicians, soloists, up-and-coming bands. Hopefully we're going to build a recording studio in there and make it very affordable. What is the community impact of St. George Musical Theater? Opportunities for over 500 plus volunteers and performers per year. In the new spaces, 80,000 patrons per year added to the Arts District vision. We're calling that area on Main Street south of downtown the new Arts District. Commercial catalyst to underserved South Main Street area. If you think about where that place is, there really is nothing on the east side of that street where the old movie theater is. And there's room for restaurants. As you probably are aware, they're refreshing the old mall. How many of you remember when it was the Kmart Mall? You remember when Albertsons was there? So the owners of that space, the MacArthur family, they're the ones who we are leasing the old movie theater from. They are refreshing and repurposing that old mall. And so part of my vision is that we're going to have a really attractive space with lots of arts, a walking corridor, so people can have choices in restaurants, retail shops, and make it very easy for you to enjoy a night out at the theater and give you lots of choices. If you're not interested in whatever's happening in the musical theater, maybe you're interested in a tribute concert. So we're going to try to really reinvigorate that area, which I could say is underdeveloped. Is that a nice term? Underdeveloped, right? We're going to address the citywide shortage of theater and arts education facilities. This is one thing that's very important to our leadership. We want to have our own in-house youth program. We did have one, the biggest one in southern Utah, before our theater was torn down, and we want to build that program back up. It's very essential to our mission statement that we find, nurture, and develop young talent. And we just haven't had the resources to do that in the Opera House, but we will with the new theater and this new performing arts campus is what we're calling the Cinema 6 remodel, the PAC, or Performing Arts Campus. And it's critical to our mission. We found that more so than any other time, children need a space where they can feel safe, loved, an opportunity to find themselves, to experience discipline, and develop their self-confidence. Parents are telling us constantly whenever we have a youth summer camp program how grateful they are that they can send their kids to a space where they know they are getting that kind of work ethic and still be a very, very safe place. Now, not all of them will make it to Broadway, but they will learn something. And as you probably are all aware, there is less and less arts funding in the schools. And so in some regard, we are replacing that void, especially between after school at 3 o'clock and 6:30, 7 o'clock. We're going to provide a lot of activities for our youth in that time frame. My grandchildren, they all go to school at Midvale Elementary. There are no arts programs in that elementary school. They don't even have a music class. So who is going to fill that void for future generations? It's going to be community theater. And we hope and are excited to fill that void. We'll do a better job than schools anyway. This is what we do, right? All right, we partnered with city, county, state patrons. The city provided a 40-year lease of the parcel, so that 2 acres where we're building the new theater. We signed a 20-year lease for the Cinema 6 site with the MacArthur family, and we have an agreement with the city that SGMT will operate independently. We've operated independently in the Opera House. Yes, it is a city-owned building, but we take care of everything. They put a new roof on it a couple years ago, but essentially everything else we take care of. We've repainted the inside 3 times. All of the equipment is brought in by us. We clean it, we maintain it, and that's what we want, that autonomy. We do not want to be a burden to the city of St. George, and that was very, very important to us. So as we raise money, it's also important for us that we not add any tax burden to the local taxpayers. We're not asking for a tax increase or anything. It's all going to come from money either that's already been pledged and earmarked for these kinds of projects or our own local community. And in October of last year, every year we have a fundraising gala, and in one night, through just community members, not major grant organizations, we raised $1 million towards this project. What an amazingly generous community we have. One night. And we're really grateful for that. We couldn't do it without this amazing community. We have progressed to construction drawing stage with Method Studio and Beecher Walker. Actually, plans for both. The Cinema 6 project is already underway. We're in demolition of those movie auditoriums, and we just turned all the drawings, all 200 pages of the drawings for the brand new theater into the city for permitting. So we're well on our way. The general contractor is Westland Construction, and we've raised approximately $7 million. Actually, it should be $8 million to date. And this is basically kind of breaks down where we've gotten some of the money. We have gotten some pledges from the state, from the county, and mostly local community members. This is our timeline on the new building. The architectural drawings complete in March 2024. They just returned in. Permitting complete in June of 2024. You never know. Bidding complete. We send it out all to bidders, for all the equipment, seats, the electrical equipment, doors. I had to make decisions on all door handles. In a 20,000 square foot theater, how many doors do you think there are? 100. Good guess. When I say that, everybody knows it's probably more than they thought, right? There's 100 doors. And guess what each one of those doors needs? Yeah, right? So imagine picking out door handles. So I went with a handle that's called the Broadway handle. I thought, so when you come see the new theater, and if I'm there, say, let me show you the Broadway handle. Oh, you'll point it out to me. I mean, when you're looking at 17 handles, how do you know which handle? This one has a little thing, this one goes up, this one goes down, this one's curved, this one's... So I just went with the one that seemed obvious, the Broadway handle. And then we're hoping to ground break after the summer. We're not going to make our local citizens stand out there for a groundbreaking in 109-degree weather in July. So maybe we'll do the groundbreaking in August or maybe September. And then hopefully the grand opening at the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. And that's an architectural rendering of the exterior. This is Main Street right here. So one thing the city requested was we had the theater a little ways back from the property, but they convinced us we should move it up so that it is closer to the sidewalk. By virtue of that, we had to get rid of all the parking spaces in front of it, but the upside is we now have kind of a plaza area. And so we're gonna plant shade trees and have water fountains. And so this will be a nice area that as the sun is setting down at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night when we start our shows, this will be a nice place to gather. But of course, we're going to have a beautiful lobby. We've never had a lobby. In 28 years of existence, we've never had our own lobby. So we're really excited about having a lobby. And there's an architectural rendering of the lobby. So there will be 2 entrances because patrons will enter on the ground level, or they can take stairs and go up. So on the ground level, you'll come in this way, and there'll be seating. There'll be a stage, so you can go up to your seats. The stage is right in the middle, or you can go up the staircase and go through the back row. So once the show opens, those doors will be closed, and our ushers will direct any latecomers to go upstairs where they have to go in and sit in the back. So be on time. And yes, there will be reserved seats. Isn't that a beautiful lobby, though? We're excited about it. This is another shot of that lobby from the second story. And we'll have concessions and tickets. Again, never had our own concessions booth. Never really had, well, I guess we have a ticket booth at the box office now. It's going to be a lot nicer.
Those stairs look like climbing the pyramid.
What's that?
Those stairs look a little steep.
Well, they probably do. They'll be accommodating, I promise. And there'll be an elevator for you too. By code, we have to have an elevator. But you do. No, that's good. And this is kind of a rendering of the inside. We'll have LED walls behind the back row of every single seat. The stage will be approximately 24 by 28 in size. Not much bigger than the 16 by 29 we have now, but instead of a bowling alley where it's a little long, it'll be a little more rectangle, right? So a little more proportional. And what's cool is the seating will be true stadium seating. The rise on it will be the tallest rise of any theater in southern Utah, or any theater, movie theater or otherwise. So in other words, when you're sitting, the person in front of you is sitting significantly lower. So imagine this, your knees will be at the head of the person in front of you. That's going to give you great visibility. Our goal is to make sure that every single seat has equal visibility. Everybody chooses their own favorite seat, for sure, but we want it to be able to legitimately say, every seat is great, no matter where you sit. Because I'm a theater goer, I go to concerts all the time. I hate that there's multiple presentations or experiences. You know, even in the West End of London, they'll give you a discount if you're willing to sit behind a limited visibility seat. And I'm like, really? Well, those buildings were built 200 years ago, right? So we're going to try to do everything in our power to make sure every seat has a great view. And you can see these actors' balconies, which we call platforms, right? Those are the balconies that go over the tunnels, sometimes called vomitories or VOMs. You can see those actor balconies will now be at the same level as the back row. So even if you're sitting in the back row, you are up close and personal to the performance. My wife has a question.
5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. I forgot. See, sorry, you need a timekeeper. All right. I'm going to save 3 minutes for questions, okay? Anyway, this is a rendering of the Cinema 6 building, the exterior. And then this kind of shows you, we have auditorium 1, which we're turning into a performance stage. This is 2 and 3. 2 will be like a backstage to this area so that we can have dressing rooms and green rooms. So whatever productions we have, kids productions, tribute concerts, we'll have an area where people can hang out. And then these 2 spaces will be earmarked for stage rehearsal stages or spaces that mirror the space across the street. Because when you are performing 175 productions a year, you've got to always be in rehearsal, right? And so we need 2 rehearsal spaces. And I'm not a math expert, but when they told me that the building across the street was going to cost $650 a square foot, but this one was only $95 a square foot, I said, let's put the rehearsal spaces there. Genius. That's why I make the big bucks. And then here's your dance studios, 5 and 6, and then 4 is the recording studio. So this is a little schematic, really nice big lobby area, plenty of offices. So really excited about that space. And just to kind of, our total price tag for both facilities, the brand new building and the renovation, about $16 million. Sounds like a lot of money. Is it? Let's take a look. The Eccles, 150. Somebody corrected me the other day, said, Bruce, it was $198 million when it got done. The Mid-Valley Taylorsville building that they just built, $39 million. The Hale Theater in Sandy, $87 million. Beecher Walker, the architect on that project, is doing our Cinema 6 remodel. The Centerpoint Legacy in Centerville, $17 million. That was 15 years ago. The Sorensen in Cedar City, about 8 years ago, was $50 million. And the brand new Hale Pleasant Grove, moving from Orem, is $53 million. I think $16 million is pretty modest compared to those. What do you think? Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I think that's it. All right, questions, comments? Yes, go ahead.
Is the now perhaps still going to continue, or are they?
Oh, absolutely. It is like the social hall. It is a city-owned building, right? So the second we get out, it'll return to being a city. It's still a city-owned building. So there's so many more organizations now that need it, along with the social hall. So I was telling Susie that I'm sure there's going to be a big demand for it because there's not enough inventory in town. So when we took it under lease 10, almost 11 years ago, it was sitting dark 95% of the time. So we came along at a good time. This is why the city loved this idea that this renovated historical building that was not getting any use, that we were going to come back in there. So it was a great win-win. We have a great partnership with the city. So good question. I'll go back to them. People often ask, hey, Bruce, you've been performing and working in there for over 20 years. When you leave the Opera House, will you feel emotional and sentimental? And I go, no. No. I am kind of a sentimental, nostalgic guy. Maybe when the truck is backed up and we got everything out of there and I turn around and there's nothing, no trace of us in there, maybe I'll get a little choked up. Right now, no. No, we can't, when you're turning people away, when your actors have to run outside in the rain to go from one entrance to the next, when you don't have a lobby and your patrons are standing out there in the rain, the rain, the wind, the heat. I did install misters, so we got misters on the balcony, which helps a little. But yeah, I don't have a lot of sentimental attachment to it. I'm glad it's going back to the city, but we've earned the right after all these years to get, our patrons have earned the right to go into a nice theater that they're proud of and invite their friends and family into a really great space. We could not be more excited, not just because it's a building for us, but because of what we're going to be able to do, the impact we're going to have on the community. That's the beauty of a community theater. It's not a professional house. Everybody that's involved in our theater, you'll see your dentist on stage, you'll see your neighbor, you'll see your bishop, you'll see your kids, your grandkids, everything about it. Everybody who performs, all the tech crew, all the ushers, the house managers, the directors, the costume designers, all of our leadership, they're all your neighbors. That's the one unique thing.
How do you do that?
Please don't ask me, because if I think about it, I might say we can't do this.
It's always been amazing to us.
I'll turn it over to my wife. How do we do it?
Well, for one thing, you have so much talent in this area. I mean, musical talent, so much talent. And then the other thing is, people are passionate about it. And so they're willing to, it's a huge it's a huge commitment, and they give up a lot of their lives and their family time to be in these shows, and not for much. They're passionate about it. They love it. That's another reason why the shows are so good.
I'll give you one just insight, and it just happens to be this one individual, but it's representative. So there was a young gentleman who, through a very debilitating injury, became paralyzed in his teenage years. His name is TJ. He and his mom have lived together for 30 years, and he has come and done about 5 shows with us in a wheelchair. We've had a number of wheelchair-based performers over the years. And I emailed him one day because we were getting information together for the city about the impact of our community. So I sent it out to a bunch of our performers. How has St. George Musical Theater changed your life? And TJ, who's now in his early 40s, said just one or two lines. And he said, Bruce, tell everybody that my involvement with St. George Musical Theater has been the most important thing I've done in my life as an adult. So it is about talent, for sure. But it really is about right here, the impact we have. And I don't mean just performers, right? The other night when we were doing Legally Blonde, I looked up at our tech booth. We had 4 girls between 16 and 25 working the tech booth. You've never, ever gone to a theater and seen 4 girls working the tech. And I'm going, our technical director is a woman. She attracts women. She's worked for Disney Imagineering for 20 years. She kind of came here, kind of semi-retired. I grabbed her up, and she has built this population, this pool of talented young people who want to be near her, who want to learn from her, who appreciate her wisdom, her compassion, her studious nature. She's developing these people. They want to be there. Passion, for sure, but also because it's an environment in which they can learn and thrive. We're losing 2 of these girls. One is going to Las Vegas to go to law school. I'm dying to tell her, you'll make more money in the theater in the short term. And the other one, who's ran lights on Monday night, Sarah, is going to MIT. You know, we're losing them, so it's hard to keep them because right now we can't really pay them what we would love to pay them, and this is another benefit of moving to a theater. We'll be able to give people a lot more financial compensation and hopefully keep them around. Because what happens is we get these young people in the theater and then they go off, they have to make a living and raise their family and stuff. So it'd be great to keep all those people here. Yeah.
Who all is paid? I mean, your technical people are actors paid?
Yes. I was able to convince the board 5 years ago that they should get something. It's a stipend. Is really what it is, because when you think about an actor, for 2.5 to 3 months, they're driving to the theater 5 days a week, sometimes 4, but 5 performances a week. Most of our performers has families and children, so they might be paying childcare. So I was able to convince the board that we should be paying them a stipend. And you know what? They really appreciate it. Our auditions kicked up quite a bit because it's an acknowledgement. And I tell them this all the time. When you get your check, you know, it might be for $500, $400, turn it over to your spouse. Right? Seriously, right? Give it to somebody so that the person that made it possible for you to support, because almost everybody has a wind beneath their wings that makes them possible. So thank those people in some way. So yes. All the directors get paid. All the technicians get paid. We have a lot of volunteers, like our ushers and house managers and box office people. They do it for complimentary tickets, and we're so grateful. We have an amazing group of volunteers. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without volunteers.
Is there any plan, like you were talking about both sides of the street?
Yeah.
Way to cross the street?
Yeah. So we hope the city will participate in that, because it needs it. It needs some type of real crosswalk. I envision I call it a walking corridor where there are pedestrian markings and lights so you can easily go from up and down the sidewalk and then across the street. If it were my city, and I'll probably run for mayor after I get the buildings built. So this will be one of my projects. I'll make sure. It is a skywalk. Wouldn't that be cool? That says welcome to St. George, right? A little thing that goes over. Wouldn't that be cool? I'm ambitious, Susie. Ambitious. Vision, that's what it takes. And then you run up against politicians.
Vote for Bruce.
It's okay. What they do is really hard. You know, a local politician has to tell 100 people a day, you know, I'm sorry, I can't. You're passionate about your project, but, you know, it's a limited pie. And so I wouldn't want their job, honestly. Maybe the mayor's job. Because that's, you know, being an ambassador to the city. That could be fun. Maybe. But then my wife will say, no, you're not being mayor. You're going to retire, and we're going to take more trips to Hawaii. That sounds good, too. What other questions? Thank you. On behalf of St. George Musical Theater, thank you. Come out.